Thank you. Please, if you have any questions about whatever I'm going to talk about, just write down your question in the chat, and maybe at the end, we'll try to address some of them. So let's start. The idea is to try to understand what's happening at the moment worldwide. We all feel that something very significant is happening. And the issue is whether we can understand some of its mechanisms, some of its reasons, and to try to figure out its impact on the next decade at least. I would like to try and explain and address the next two questions. The first question is, of course, what's the rationale behind world order as we have seen it in the last 80 years since World War II? Because something is probably very stressed because of that rationale, and that's why we see what we see right now worldwide. The other question is if we, at this point of time, can somehow understand the vectors of what's happening at the moment, at least in the next decade. And I will try to focus on the next decade only, even though there are a lot of studies that go beyond a decade. So in order to really see what I'm going to try to do is, I'm just trying to collect some points, some events that are happening lately, and make some sense of those events. For example, what's the connection between what happened in Israel and with the Houthis, and how come Trump took office again, and how come he suddenly comes out with an idea of he wants to conquer again Greenland, and what's his ideas about Panama. And if you combine a lot of things that are happening, you see that something is in the making. Now, it is not easy at this point of time to collect those points in time and make sense of all of them at once and see if we can figure out a clearer picture of what's happening. It takes time to really, first of all, know what happened, and then figure out the meaning of those combined events that are shaping the future. But nonetheless, I will try to do it. In order to emphasize that something really amazing and not amazing, but very significant is in the making, let me briefly show you one of the very mind-boggling study that was published just lately. And what they found is that 2024 was the bloodiest year in terms of world conflict since World War II. Now, you can see it in a lot of graphs. I'm not going to go and detail everything that has happened in the last 2 decades, but you see that of course, now we are almost over 2025, but it seems to be that in 2023, 24, there were more than now already more than 60 separate conflicts worldwide in a very large spread a lot on a lot of different countries, different fronts. And it is something that is really frightening to see. There are studies that speak that there were more now than a million casualties in 1 year, just in different conflicts worldwide. I'm not speaking about people that are injured, etc. So it looks not only that there are so many conflicts worldwide, it looks that the conflicts are spread almost all over the world. And this is something that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we might miss something that is happening. And not only that, the conflicts are spread all over the world. You see that the conflicts are becoming much more brutal, and they are stressed on many more years than it used to be usually. So the idea is to try to see if there is something behind those numbers. Now, not only that they are stressed on more years, but you see that most of those conflicts are intertwined together. They are connected to each other. And a lot of people are trying to understand how come they are so cruel, they are so interconnected, and how come they are stressed on so many years that we were not used to see, at least since World War II. There are a lot of explanation. One of the explanation that I think is really important to note is that most of the time in history, great powers used to engage in conflicts, and at a certain time they understood that that's it. There's no more reasons to stress those conflicts, and they would negotiate whatever they needed to negotiate to stop those conflicts. After World War II, and specifically after humanity has developed a nuclear bomb, everybody, and most importantly, the great powers, are frightened that conflicts will go into that phase of nuclear. So what they have developed is what we call now the proxy wars. And they are conducting their interests and their conflicts through their proxies. The problem is that everybody is using that conflict, that strategy. And what we see is that if there is a conflict somewhere, then a lot of other nations are muddling in that conflict, and that conflict becomes a proxy not of two powers but of a lot of powers. So even though the great powers decide that that's enough and we don't want any more to stress that conflict, then other powers, even regional powers, are continuing using that specific conflict for their interest. And that's why we see a lot of conflicts, and conflicts that are spreading across many more years. And of course, it's the more the years are becoming many years, the more there are casualties. So this is one of the explanations of what's happening. Nonetheless, it remains to understand. So what drives this world kind of trend? Now, in order to bring together some of the events that we are seeing in the last at least decade or two, I need to stress a very important point, which is the methodology with which I'm going to try to connect those dots. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that speak about the future. Nobody is telling us with which methodology they are analyzing the trends. They don't even bother to say the validity of those methodologies. And this is a very important point I would like all of you to take, at least from this presentation, which is everybody that speaks about the future needs to be aware, first of all, of the methodology with which he analyzes the trends, and be aware of the pros and cons of that methodology, because you can analyze anything with different methodologies, and you will come up with different let's say conclusions, etc. So I would like to present the methodology with which I'm going to analyze what probably is happening, even though really nobody really knows what's happening at the moment. It's too vague. There's a lot of noise in the systems, but nonetheless, we have to try in order to figure out the landscape and to see how we can be much more effective in our decision making. The methodology is a very old methodology that was developed during the 16th century and the 17th century, and during the 20th century it was kind of put aside, and people didn't think it's very important. And the methodology says the following. Okay, there are a lot of people that wrote about those methodologies. What you see here is just one of them that spoke about how we understand as a species what drives conflict in history during at least the last 500 years. So Mahan and Mackinder said the following. On this planet, there is a spot which they call the land power. That spot, what you see here is the red spot on Earth. On that spot, there are a lot of resources, and humanity is trying to reach those resources for the benefit of their offsprings. Now, what you see, the blue part, is where most of humanity now resides. Okay, so this is what we call the heartland. Okay, the geostrategic heartland. And humanity for centuries were competing with each other in order to reach part of the resources that are here. As you see, this is what we call nowadays Asia and in Russia, etc. By the way, there is another study, a nice study that was just published, in which they found that around a very specific village, actually, in Myanmar, if you draw a line of about 3,000 kilometers, you see that most of humanity, more than half of humanity, resides in that area. And that explains why humanity is concentrated on that area, because this is where these are the routes towards that heartland, and through those routes we are competing, and through those routes for centuries we saw a lot of conflicts. Now, this is a methodology that explains why humanity has been in conflict for many, many, many years. And based on this methodology, after World War II, the great powers that came out from that conflict, victorious, they try to address that need of humanity to reach that piece of land, in order to bring the flames down as much as possible, because after World War II, everybody was really shocked of what humanity was able to do. And here, that's what I would like to cover a little bit. If you wish, there are a lot of studies and a lot of pictures and photos around this theory. And what you see over there is that more than 80% of gas and oil of humanity is residing. It's a lot of numbers. I don't want to stress it too much. So on this methodology, humanity has developed after World War II what we call now the world order, which is called by everybody globalization. And it seems to be that based on this methodology, we missed a lot of things. And that's the reason why we see now the rationale of the world order that was based on that methodology is crumbling. And I would like to enlarge a little bit, elaborate on that matter. Okay, after World War II, I don't know if you remember how many people, how many casualties were in World War II. There are different numbers in the literature. It goes from 50 million people to more than 90 million people. It depends who's counting and where, but nobody really knows. let's say about between 70 to 80 million people. It was devastating. And there were, most of the time, you have at least twice double that number of people that were injured. And nowadays we're speaking more than tripling that number. So it was devastating. Humanity came out from that conflict very devastated. And the victors said to themselves, let's try to develop a world order that will somehow stop the vicious cycles that we have been seeing in the last at least centuries, if not millennia. So they came with the idea, based on this methodology I just mentioned, they came with the idea that humanity has been working and acting for millennia with the idea that if someone has some resources, then they lack those resources, which is what we call the paradigm of abundance with scarcity. And we were competing to reach part of those resources because we were afraid that our offsprings will be left without those resources. Now, since that mindset was very clear for the victors after World War II, because if you analyze what happened between World War I to World War II, that's exactly the point. Nations are afraid that they don't have resources and they need part of those resources. And at the beginning, they are trying to dance with each other and do some juggling in order to somehow share. If it doesn't help, then they are becoming very aggressive. And the victor said, is there a way to stop or to reverse that paradigm? And that's what they were trying to do after World War II for the last 80 years. And now that paradigm, the new paradigm that they have developed is crumbling. And the new paradigm says the following. They said to themselves, let's open the world, this planet, so that first of all, everybody will be able to share with each other whatever they need, without being afraid that someone will steal those resources just in their roots to each other, which we have seen for really centuries. People used to steal from each other. And in order to do it, the victor, most of them were the Americans and the Europeans. They said, let's open the world, open the seas, open the seaports so that everybody will have access to any place they want. And that was part of the game of the Cold War between the USSR and the US. The idea was to push away as much as possible the great powers in order to open totally this planet. But that's not enough, because opening it's not enough. You have to develop a platform that police those seas, because most of our needs is actually traveling and passing through the seas. This is the most important highway that humanity is using to share with each other resources. So they said, we will take upon ourselves to police that platform, which cost trillions of dollars. And they took it upon themselves in order to stop that way, that feeling that somebody might, even if I got something from somewhere or someone, somebody will take it away from us just in its routes to our seaports. But that's not enough also. They said, okay, we need to develop a world system with which we will be able to share resources without having to pay tariffs to each other. And that's what actually we have seen during the last 80 years. Bit by bit, we developed as a species some international institutes, some world trade organizations in order to open what we are all calling nowadays globalization. Okay, now that idea that you can, by just opening this planet to each other and bringing resources from one place to another place without that fear, that idea that was based on the methodology, as I have mentioned, is at least in a very difficult stage, if not crumbling. There are some experts that are saying it has already crumbled, it has already collapsed, but some others are saying no, we can fix it somehow. Okay, and this is actually the feeling that we are at the moment. And the feeling is, of course, you can see it in different events, because the most important event that we have mentioned is the globalization. This is a nice way to show what happened in the last 50 years. About in the 70s, you see how the world was organized. The more it is dark, the more that nation, that country was what we call now globalized, which means that it had some interactions with other nations, either in trade or culturally, etc. In a matter of just 50 years, take a look of what happened worldwide. This is what we call actually globalization. We are all interconnected, sharing with each other. And what the victors have done after World War II, they said in order to bring everybody to share with each other, we will eliminate tariffs with the victors, even though the victors will pay tariffs to those nations that are emerging in history. But somehow, what you see here is actually the feeling that is driving a lot of events at the moment. What you see here is that the countries that were developing countries have taken advantage of the system much more than the nations that developed that globalized system. And in the last 2 decades, a lot of people in the developed countries are walking with the feeling that not only that they have not taken advantage by other nations, but there are some nations that they want to push away our nation from the global platform that we have paid for and we have designed, and we are taking care that it will continue to work. And that will explain, of course, how populist leaders are emerging different places, how Trump has emerged for the second time in different countries. It's not just in the West. And here we see that the victors of World War II have the feeling that if they will not fix the system, then the system will collapse, which means that we will go to another world war as they understand what drives world war, because there are now a lot of nations that cannot count anymore on the system. Okay, and there are some landmarks that explain that feeling. Well, the first landmark, of course, was when the USSR has collapsed and the world became a unilateral world in which there is only one nation that drives everything, and the other nations are feeling that that's not fair. Another landmark was when Xi Jinping has taken office in China, and he brings into the table that he wants to be part of the great system and take decisions and not lead and not have just a unilateral but maybe a multilateral kind of world order. And of course, when Putin invaded Ukraine, it was clearly that he devastated the world order, because since he invaded, somehow the international law and the idea that if you have differences between nations, then you bring those differences to international institutes and you somehow solve those differences. And what he did is actually, even though he signed somehow a peace treaty with Ukraine, he invaded, and nobody can even count on a treaty that is being signed between nations. And these are just some of the examples of what you see. And here Trump comes with his ideas that we need to fine-tune the system. And by fine-tuning, as he understands it, is that we need to rebalance the relationships between nations so that everybody will pay their shares for that great platform, which we call globalization, and nobody will take advantage of each other. And he says, okay, for 80 years, we were able to open our markets for everybody and share, and we were willing to pay tariffs to other nations. Now that's enough. Now we have to be equal. Otherwise, and this is very important to note, otherwise what we're going to see is that the system will continue to crumble, and what we will see is that another world war. This is what drives, according to many people, what we call now the tariffs policy of the Trump administration. And at the moment, what we see is that there are 4 optional ideas how to fix the system. And this is what I would like to a little bit elaborate on. The first block of nations, which are democratic nations, open nations, the nations that developed and designed the current world order. And those nations were trying to develop the system, as I have mentioned, into 3 or 2 phases. Actually, 2 phases. Now they are going through the 3rd phase to fine-tune the system. The first phase of developing the world economic system, at least, is what they call the Bretton Woods system, in which they have done something very important that we are all part at the moment. They have fixed the dollar as the exchange currency. And they said, whoever will take the dollar as the exchange currency, he will be part of the global system that we are developing, and we will be able to open our markets to it. And then that system didn't exactly work, and there was a transition time in the 70s. And then they have continued to fine-tune that system into the 2nd phase of that system, which is called now the neoliberal order. And in the neoliberal order, they have added something very important, which is lowering the tariffs of many nations for them to continue having the dollar as the exchange currency. And the idea was that if you take the system that we have designed, then the world power, which is the US and NATO, will be protecting you from any threat that you will be seeing in the future. That was very important. Now, what you see in these two phases is the following. Since the victors of World War II have opened their markets to everybody, everybody was, and without actually tariffs, and everybody said, okay, now it's time to develop, to manufacture, and sell as much as possible to those nations. And the outcome of that simple trend, if you wish, is that the victorious nations of World War II, bit by bit, have went through what we call deindustrialization. It was very cheap for other nations to manufacture goods and have resources openly from each other without tariffs. And bit by bit, the developed nations felt what we call industry that is collapsing. Now, by understanding what that means, you can see the seed of the troubles, because everybody sees that the system is in stress. Okay, so the great powers or the victorious powers, they see that they have deindustrialized, which means that if something happens worldwide, they don't have the infrastructures in-house in order to be able to address the conflicts if there will be a conflict in the future. Because we know that the more you have industry and powerful industries in-house, the more you'll be able, even though, let's say, for example, you have car industries that are developing cars. In times of wars, those industries are shifting immediately into developing not cars, but other combat vehicles, if you wish. Now, the developed nations, they understand that if something happens worldwide, and they see that something is happening, they already know that if something happens, they don't have the ability to address the challenge, and they know that up front they are going to lose. And therefore, what Trump is trying to do is to bring back industries in order to redevelop industries in-house in order to address if there will be some challenges in the future. This is the idea, and therefore, if you analyze what the Trump administration is trying to do, you see that they are speaking about organizing the world into three great blocks. Okay, the first block is what they call the allies, with which they will continue to do business as they used to be, even though there will be some fine-tuning, and that's exactly what we are seeing. The agreements they are trying to do with the Europeans, with Canada, with Japan, etc., etc. But that block will be what they will be calling allies, and they will continue to have or trade with them. There will be another block of nations that they are calling already at the moment neutrals nations, okay, like India, etc., with which they will be a little bit more tough in order for them to calibrate their relationships so that they will not take advantage of the American markets. Okay, and you see it already even with the Switzerland this week. Okay, and there will be another block which they call the enemies. Okay, or the communists, if you wish. Here in the States, people are having a lot of connotations with that term, which will be the enemies. And with those enemies, they will not open their market. They will they will challenge them. And if you wish, we are going back to pre-World War II as we have seen it. Okay, And this is how they believe they will be able to recalibrate the world order in order not to slide into another great war or devastating conflict. Okay? Now, I would really recommend you to go and read this paper that was written by one of the thinkers, Stephen Miran, of the Trump administration, in which he explains exactly how the idea that the dollar is the global reserve currency is one of the problems that of the industrialization of the West. And he explains the way they would like to address the issue. And I would really recommend all of you to go and read this paper. It was published about a year ago. And you'll see the rationale behind what they think and how they think they would like to fix the system. Now, let me stress a very important point over here. Most of the experts are saying that there is a problem in the world system. Now, nobody agrees, nobody debates anymore that issue. There is a problem. The differences between experts is how to address those problems. Now, Stephen Miran understands that there are some points in his views how to address the problems that are not exactly the best way to address the problems, that nobody else is coming up with how to address the problems. Everybody agrees that there is a problem, but only a few people at the moment come up. They have some ideas how to address the problems, even though they understand that their ideas are not perfect. And this is the exact timing that you and me are now in history. And how is it going to develop? This is what I would like to address at the moment, because if we understand the global context of what's happening and see how different people or different nations are trying to address the issues, then we can somehow, I'm speaking because it's very hard at this stage in the development of a system to figure out what might happen. It takes that we are in a time in systems thinking that is called the time of the disequilibrium, and a lot of things might change very, very rapidly, and it is always very hard at this point of time to understand and figure out the vector with great reliability. So there is one group of nations that are saying, okay, we have an idea how to fix the problem. Okay, that block of nations is organizing themselves in terms of economic treaties to security treaties. And we are all familiar with the ANZUS and the Quad and the Five Eyes. And if you're not familiar, I would really urge you to go and see how these nations are reorganizing themselves in blocks to address the security issues and to address the economic and trade issues. And this is exactly what Trump is doing. He's not the first to try to do it. Obama before it did it, and of course Biden also before it did it. And it is continuing. Some of those treaties are being signed behind the scenes. Some of them are very known already to everybody. And these are not just security treaties. There are a lot of economic treaties, if you wish. The Abraham Accord in the Middle East is part of those economic and of course security treaties that are in the making with a lot of troubles, with a lot of challenges. But this is the time in which everybody is engaged to reorganize the world into blocks, not as we have seen them, not as we have seen the world up to at least a decade ago. Okay, this is one way, one let's say paradigm of fixing the system. But this is only one paradigm, and nobody knows if they will be succeeding in achieving their goals. But this is one way to see what's happening. There is another block of nations that is emerging through what we have called the BRICS. And many other nations are joining the BRICS in order, first of all, to change the dollar as the trade currency. Okay? And then, which is very important. Now, Trump is very clear about it, that if a nation will not accept anymore the dollar as the currency, the most important currency, then he will put a lot of tariffs on that nation. He understands that if there will be many other currencies working around worldwide, that's chaotic. And if it's chaotic, that means it's only a matter of time until conflicts will continue to be much more aggressive and much more spread across many other nations. And as you are probably all familiar with, China, Russia, and Brazil are part of the nations that are willing to lead that block of nations. And their idea is to develop a world that is multilateral, that there is no one single power that is taking care of the rules. And we will in some aspects, we will continue to be global. In some other aspects, we will be regional. And nobody will impose on us tariffs, or nobody will impose on us a way of living, or even values, etc. This is the second block of nation. There is a third block of nation. The block of the third one is called the Poor South, and there are something like 50 to 80 nations that are joining that block of nations. These are the poorest nations. They feel that their stance was not didn't have room in the current world order, and the great powers were imposing on them things that they were not able to follow, and they would like to organize themselves and to be a block of nations that will be able to come into the table, negotiate with the other great nations, and have their stance taken into account in trade, in security, in values, etc., etc. The Indians are willing to lead that block of nation, which is called the Poor South. And this is what makes the US a little bit frustrated with India, and we will see that it will be very difficult to negotiate with India. By the way, the Indians are saying that this was their way of thinking for millennia, to be, some kind of a balance between the West and the East. But this is the third nation. I'm very concerned not with those nations, because those nations will negotiate with each other, and they will see to come into some kind of a balance. The fourth nation, the fourth block, is what really concerns me, which is called the most powerful tech companies. As you see, it is clear their power to control nowadays almost anything, the way we think, the way we act, our personal info, everything is being at least traversed through their platforms. And if they will take the lead, and if they will say that the world is crumbling and there is a need for another power, which is international power without, let's say, values, okay, or without geographic interest, etc., they will be able to be a very dominant power that some say that they will balance the system. Some say that they will devastate the system. And we already know what is their power if they are just willing to execute the tools they have in hand. I don't think that their intention is to take care of garbage in streets, etc., like governments, but still they will be able even to take care of trash if they are willing to. And I'm aware of a lot of companies that this is exactly what they are willing to do in order to make some bucks. These are the four groups that have different ideas how to rebalance the world order. And nobody knows who's going to win and how things might develop in the next decade. But most of the experts are speaking that there are some landmarks in the next decade. A lot of experts are saying that 2025 is crucial, that we're going to see the order either collapsing because of some activities that some powers will be engaged in. I believe it has happened already. Just the idea that the Americans have engaged in a battle actually in Iran is a very important landmark. How world order is really shaking in its foundations. And it will be very hard to see how it will work out in the future, because nobody is going to accept that kind of activity, and there will be a reaction to it. That's one landmark. The other landmark is 2027. A lot of people in here, really, a lot of people are saying that it's probably going to be a very crucial landmark in how we are going to see the vector going on. And the reason is that China and the US and NATO, everybody now, are actually preparing themselves for a great conflict on 2027. And they have already published it. They are speaking about it out loud. It's not exactly in back rooms that those kind of thinking and talk are going on. And you are all probably following. The leaders in Europe are speaking about it. The Americans are preparing themselves that their army will be ready for conflict in 2027. The Chinese also, Russia also, everybody. Okay, that's 2027. We better be careful about that here. And there are other people that are saying that it might be, somehow a little bit managed in the next decade, but at best, 2035 will be, at least in the next decade, it will be very stressful. Now, almost everybody speaks that we did not reach the climax yet or the transition time between the earlier stages of world order, as I have mentioned, and the next phase of world order. There is only maybe one, I know that only one is speaking that there is a way to avoid this conflict. There's a way, and he's the former Prime Minister of Australia, and it is very clear why Australia is really very fearful of what's happening, because if something happens in Asia, Australia will be hit very hard by all means, and a lot of reasons, from economic to real combat, because in the middle of Australia there are some very important US posts that are monitoring everything that is happening worldwide. So these are the four ways to understand what's happening. Now, if you think I'm pessimistic, don't worry, I'm not. I believe that humanity is constantly developing. It's developing through some times of conflict, sometimes of stress. And I believe that we are already developing the platform of the next phase of world order. And that platform will be much more open. That platform will be much more, let's say, equal between nations. And I'm trying to understand what are the small things that we can do, and we are already starting to do at the moment, that will realign, redefine a world order for humanity, and our offsprings will benefit from it much more than we have benefited from the way we have organized the world in the last 80 years. And for it, I would like to, I think it is very important for your specific industry. As you see, the maritime trade routes are amazing nowadays. Between 60 to 90% of all goods that are that we consume on every part on this planet is traversed through the seas. Not only goods nowadays, we are all familiar that even the most important commodity that is moving through the seas is our information. At this very moment, we are together in probably something like 50 nations altogether. Everybody is sitting somewhere else, and we are sharing ideas through those routes that are going in the seas. The problem with our seas is that there are many choke points, and through those choke points there were always troubles. And I'm going to concentrate on two very important choke points that will be the core of the troubles in the next decade. However, I'm going to show you that we are already engaged in solving those problems. Okay, and that will give you some sense how we are a species that is constantly developing. We'll be much more free, we will be much more globalized, we will be much more rich, everything will be much more, even though we will have to go through transition times in which we are fine-tuning our system. Okay, so the first is, of course, the Malacca Strait. For you, I don't have to explain what's a Malacca Strait. I believe you are eating that strait every second of your life. Malacca Strait is really very important to connect the East with the West, as you see here. Without the Malacca Strait, we will have to go through circumventing this earth much more. That will cost to each one of us a lot of money. As you see, the Malacca Strait has an opening, and it's wide at the beginning, and it's very narrow at the end in Singapore. This is the reason why Singapore has done very, very well in the last half a century. And the problem with the Malacca Strait, which is really a great opportunity in the last 80 years, but still a great frightening choke point that everybody is preparing himself in order to do something if something will block that strait. In any case, what you see here is that through the Malacca Strait, something like 2/3 of the maritime trade of China is going through, something like 1/3 of the Japanese maritime trade, and about 1/3 of the global maritime trade is passing through that strait. So if something happens, okay, let's say there is a tension between the China and the US, and the US will have to do something. One of the options they have is to block that strait. And there are studies that are saying that if Malacca Strait will be blocked, then China will come to its knees in a matter of 18 months. That's a crucial choke point for the Chinese, for their energy consumption. Let's see their energy consumption, if you wish. Okay, about 80% of the Chinese oil imports is coming through the Malacca Strait, about 80% of the Japanese imports, and generally speaking, about 3/4 of oil consumption of humanity at the moment is passing through the Malacca Strait. So if something happens to the Malacca Strait, then the world is devastated. It's actually the world. It's not just here and there. We're speaking about the collapse of world economy. And since it's very frightening, so a lot of nations are trying already at the moment to solve the problem. And it will be solved during the next 2 decades. And in the second half of the 21st century, we're going to see a very different world that is not driven by those fears. Okay, I'll show you just how different nations are trying to address this fear. The South China Sea is a matter of a lot of stress at the moment worldwide. As you see, there are about 7 nations around the South China Sea, and this is the DNA. These are the borders of each nation, in order for everybody to be able to pass without nobody to melt with their shippings. And what the Chinese have done is actually they took over almost all the South China Sea. Not only took over, but they have developed some they have built some islands, and they are putting a lot of military equipment on those islands in order for them, in case somebody will block the Malacca Strait, they will be able to address. You see what they have done. And there are troubles around the South China Sea. If there will be some conflict, it will probably be over there. And there are different simulations that are running in different places worldwide, trying to figure out what might happen, how things might develop if the conflict will start in the South China Sea. Some say it will start with Taiwan. I'm not sure it will start with Taiwan. Most of the time, it starts in places that everybody thinks it will not be so crucial, and the other side will not react as they don't want them to react. So this is only one way to see how others are preparing themselves. Now, what we are seeing is that a lot of things are happening either behind the scene or up front in different ways in order to solve those choke points, fears that are crucial for each of us in terms of getting our needs. So here's another one that is being developed already more than a decade, and step by step you see that is being realized. India is combined with the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Israel to overcome the Suez choke point. And it's not only through that route that is being now developed, and you have already probably heard that there was um, something happening, something already signed between the US and India and Israel and Saudi Arabia to start developing those routes. Those routes will combine either maritime chunks of routes and railroads and highways in order to streamline the trade routes that will not have to go through those choke points. Now, it's not only them. You see that the Chinese are doing a lot of work to connect their western part to through Pakistan and to bypass the Malacca Strait. They are speaking about different places worldwide they would like to open. I'll show you just one. This is the part of the Abraham Accords, at least the dream of the Abraham Accords, that will change the balance between East and West. I truly believe that the moment that Abraham Accord will be enlarged to other nations, the Middle East is going to begin to be a crucial point of connection, a node of connections between East and West, even though there are some experts that are saying it's very difficult to secure those routes, much more difficult than securing sea routes, as we see how the Houthis are trying to disturb those sea routes. But we'll see. At least there is thinking going on behind the scene. These are what the Chinese are trying to do in order to circumvent the Malacca Strait. They are already starting to develop another canal that will again circumvent the Malacca Strait through Thailand. If you see, there was a lot of debate how it will be, how where exactly it will pass, but they have already decided the route of that canal, and it will again open another choke point. And what we're going to see actually is that we're going to see a lot of other choke points opening on this planet that will ease the stress of the seas. Okay, let's go to see the most important trade routes that are developing. The other choke point which is crucial is of course the Panama Canal. I believe with all of you guys, I don't have to explain exactly what Panama Canal is. It's one of the most important choke point worldwide, through which about 35% of maritime trade is passing, world maritime trade, and about 70% of maritime trade with at least the eastern part of the US is passing through the canal. The canal is built in a very specific way so that it will be able to bring or connect the two oceans. I don't have to explain, but Trump was very concerned about the Malacca, the Panama, because he understands that if something happens to those great gates, either by intention or by a hazard, then trade with the US will be devastated for some many weeks at least, if not months. And that's why he was very aggressive with Panama. I just visited over there. Nowadays it's much better. The problem with Panama is that the Lake Gatun is having troubles from time to time. It is drying from time to time. Now it's recovering, but nobody is counting on it that it will recover for forever, because really there are a lot of stress on that canal in terms
how much water you are using in order to bring those great ships from one part of the other part to the nation. This is how now it looks like. It's very good at the moment. I was there just a month ago, and the way to try to circumvent the Panama Canal if something happens, then we're seeing now four great projects that are being developing, four alternatives to Panama Canal. It's not alternatives, it might be also additions to Panama Canal, because world trade is constantly growing, constantly. We are developing, we need resources from each other, we are using different nations that in which we can industrialize and manufacture our needs as cheap as possible, and we are moving things in ways humanity has never done in history. So these are the four different alternatives. Let's go briefly on four of them so that you'll see that's something really in the making. The first one is the bio-oceanic corridor that will bypass three countries in South America, and it has been already in the making. China is taking a very important role in developing that corridor. The most important choke point in that corridor is here over here. There are three nations that are sharing a piece of land over there, in which there are some important minerals that humanity will be needing in the future, and whoever will be the boss of that corridor will have great power in world trade. That's the first one. The other one is the Colombian corridor. As you see, this is here is Panama Canal, and Colombia wants to take the lead because, as you all know, Panama used to be part of Colombia, and they are not exactly happy with the way it has developed in the last century. So they would like to develop their alternative routes, and this is a combined route that will use from pieces of water canals, and, as I said, the highways and rail routes. And it's also developing, even though the pace of that development is much slower than the others. There is another one, the Nicaragua corridor. Nicaragua also wants its part in world trade, and the problem with that corridor is that it's not exactly working according to plans. A lot of money was wasted over there, and I'm not sure Nicaragua will be able to really manage that challenge. It's not an easy challenge to develop a corridor, and then what they would like to do actually is develop a 100 kilometers water canal that will bring together the two oceans. I think that the most uh, important, if not promising one, is the Mexican corridor. The Mexican corridor, as far as I know, when it will be finished, it will be able to manage a lot of trade. The idea is to be even to be able to bypass or bring or pass something like 33 million tons of goods that will pass over there. This is why also Trump is really very tough with Mexico, and there are a lot of of things still to overcome for that route, but I believe this is the most promising route that will be part of a much larger new routes that we will see, and this is actually what we are looking at the moment in history. Those projects, most of the time, they take about 20 years to accomplish, but they have started, but nonetheless, the next decade is very stressful. I would like to finish with a very interesting anecdote, if I still have time. The anecdote is that everybody was speaking about Greenland, but Greenland is becoming very important. The more the oceans will warm up a little bit, there will be some months that they will be able to somehow accommodate great ships. It will be very important. The issue is that most of us think that Greenland is part of Europe, but actually Greenland is part of North America, and that's why Trump is still very aggressive about Greenland. He understands that if the oceans will warm up and and the route will be opened through the north for trade from Asia to the Americas and to Europe, then it will become very crucial to have some stand and to have some military posts in Greenland, and that's why he's very aggressive over there. It depends how you see, Greenland from which perspective, but it is very clear that this is what makes it very important. And I would like to finish with this nice photo. If you take a look, this is how the US looks like from above. And a lot of experts were trying to understand what made exactly the US so powerful in the last 200 years. So there are a lot of reasons, but this is a very important reason. When you take a look at the US from above, you see that the US is crisscrossed by rivers and great ways to traverse from east to west, from north to north. And that gave them a lot of advantage during the last at least first century, in which they didn't have to develop and invest in infrastructures in order to trade with each other from north to west and east, etc. And that's a very important advantage. This is one of the ways to understand what made the US so powerful in the last couple of centuries. And besides, of course, they were able to trade without investing in routes infrastructures because of the east coast and the west coast. And here you have an idea why the seas are so important. They were always important, and they were the cause of a lot of conflicts. And this is what gives some sense of what's happening. If you have got my basic idea, is that we're going to go through some decade of some troubles, but afterwards we're going to develop a much more an open system that will bring humanity to higher levels of interactions. And it doesn't matter if it's going to be multilateral or bilateral. It doesn't matter. Humanity is developing. I'm very optimistic about humanity, even though there'll be some hard times in transition times. That's it, guys. I already spoke too much, and I would urge you, if you have any questions, please. Who's going to take the lead and see if there were some? No, nobody has written any question. But if you want to ask any question, I'm here for you, as much as I know, as much as I can, anytime you wish. Go ahead. Who's taking the lead to to ask the question.
I want to ask you a question, Professor, and maybe how close are we to those alternatives that you talked about? Nowadays we know Panama, the Canal Panama, and we know the Suez, but how close are we to the alternatives that you suggested that will be replacing those?
Well, as I mentioned, most of the time it takes, in the past it took 3-4 decades, sometimes even more than that. Nowadays we're speaking between 1 to 2 decades. The problem is those 2 decades that there are those alternatives are not accomplished yet. But we will do better than we are doing at the moment. And managing those transition times are the most difficult things to do, because not all of us are aware of the great picture. Each one of us is concentrated on different parts, and there are a few experts worldwide that see the picture from above and see how those parts of the picture are interacting together. So I believe that some of those projects will be accomplished in a matter of a decade. Some of them will be much more than that. And I always take into account that those projects, even though their timeline is 1 decade, I always double the number of years that it takes for them to accomplish the project, because these are huge projects, not only in terms of economic investment, but also geographically challenging. There are projects that are also culturally challenging. A lot of nations are not exactly willing, to do things that are disturbing population, because in any case you have to push populations from here to there, and it disturbs that now not only human populations but also animal populations that everybody is taking care of also. So most of the time it takes at least a double of the estimates of the timing. So I believe that in a matter of by the mid 21st century, most of those projects will be accomplished. If that was the question. Okay, guys.
Can I add on that? But if the world is fast moving, how relevant will be those projects, and how many projects can be neglected over the time? Because there was always new technologies, new feature, the whole AI, and etc. How those projects can be relevant in 2 decades.
Of course, the technologies are the tool with which we are able to be much more effective in our dealings, in our making, everything we're doing. But in any case, people used to think just a few years ago that we are in a global, let's say, culture, that there is no meaning to geography. There's no meaning to borders. That's not true. We are a very physical entity. We are a species that is defined by the geography that he is put in. And it will take many more centuries that we will be able to overcome those constraints. So the technologies will help us. We will do it in a better manner. We will do it with less casualties. Not just think about how many people died in developing the Panama Canal. The French, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't succeed, and there were about 30,000 casualties just trying to develop that canal. And then when the Americans came, they were also a lot of people died in those challenges. Technologies will help us eliminate those byproducts of our dealings, of our doings. But nonetheless, we are geographically embedded on this planet. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying so you won't prevent it, but it only accelerates it, the technology.
Yes, exactly. That's what I said, because earlier those projects used to take decades. Nowadays it will take 1 or 2 decades. That's a great thing. Don't underestimate, even though in our lifetime 2 decades is a lot. But in history it's nothing. Anyone else? Okay, guys.
Professor, thank you very much.
All right, thank
for
you.
being and talking. Very interesting. Thank you everybody for joining, and we'll be seeing you in the next meetings. Thank you very much for everybody. Thank you, Professor Pasir.
Sorry, Professor, I sent you a question in the chat. If you can address it,
let's see.
You can address it privately.
Oh, you want it privately?
You can. I don't know if it will interest everyone.
Okay, I think it will interest everyone. Let's try. Okay. The idea is that the tariffs for some people, it looks like it will diminish the power of the US as a global superpower. That's not their intention, at least. Okay, their intention is that it will raise. He's talking over there. Hello, who's that? Okay, so I believe that the US still have a very good stance on world order. Now, we have never seen a great power such as the US in history. It has so many advantages, geographical advantages, a lot of culture, a lot of advantages. It is the 21st century is still a very important for the US. So it will diminish some of its power because there will be some other nations that will try, to conduct trade without the rules of that superpower. But it will be very hard for them. So that's one way to see. The other way is that that's exactly the point of the Trump administration. Through those tariffs, they will raise their power, not diminish their power. So I'm not at the point in which I can say if they will be succeeding in their way of conducting or trying to fine-tune this world system. But I believe that their stance will still be very dominant in the 21st century. It's not easy to overcome. It's not easy to push away and diminish those advantages. Now, I have written a book just about the advantages of this great superpower of our time. And it's not something that will be disappear in a matter of a decade or two. That's something that diminishes in time through 1 or 2 centuries at least. Okay, guys, thank you so much. You were very quiet. I don't know why. I don't know if you were with me or not. I was speaking to myself, but this is life nowadays in digital connectivity. Okay.